In 6 inches of soil, our world comes alive. A podcast of passion where all souls thrive.
I think the planet will be fine. We may not be, but the planet will be fine.
So often, like I said, people see the risks and they see the worst future that we want to avoid, but they don't know what a better future looks like that we can move toward.
Think of it, Earth, the planet, as a spaceship going through that blackness of space. Okay, this is Spaceship Earth. We're all crew on this one beautiful blue and white and brown and green marble traveling through space.
I sometimes think what it would be like if we could take every human on the planet to share that experience just for 6 seconds. How would that change their behavior, what food they bought, how they acted in their lives and stuff?
The overview effect is real.
I got to say I'm jealous of the views that Colonel Fossum enjoyed. I'd love to see that. My view has been from a height of about 5 feet 10 inches.
Not very many people on this planet have the perspective of a Colonel Mike Fossum. And not even that many people on this planet have the perspective of a Will Harris. So there's a lot of people who want to do the right thing, but they don't know what it looks like.
I came from a culture that believed that we were more powerful than the cycles of nature.
The way we find our way looking at maps, primarily it's those colored lines that define borders, and you can't see them from space. They're human constructs. And
when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe.
And around the world, most people are already worried about the future of our lives on this planet. But if we don't know what to do, and we don't know that those things can build a future that is better than the one we have today, not worse, people aren't going to move forward at scale.
Soil mates unite in a bold common chase, building our future through Earth's living grace.
Welcome to 6 Inches of Soil, the podcast. My name's Richard. I'm joined by superstar producer Claire McKenzie as ever. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Now, keener listeners, older listeners might notice something different about the start of this podcast. What was that music, Claire?
Yes, the music, the magic music. We know a creative farmer, many creative farmers, but one called Matt Griffin. And Richard and I had heard his music. He'd been sharing occasionally on social media, and then someone put one in one of my WhatsApp regen groups, and everyone was really excited about it. And then Richard, you came up with the idea and said, could we ask Matt
Yeah,
to create an original score?
Yeah, he does more than just music. He's actually a bit of a poet. So he writes poetry as a way just to relax when he's out in the fields and feeling a bit stressed with farm life. And he likes to sit there and write his own original words, which is what we asked him to do. And I think he did a really nice job. So big shout out to Matt. At some point, we'll have a little interview with him. But that was really kind of him to do that. And I think it adds a nice layer to the podcast. Really happy.
And if you want to find out about Matt, he's at Need Path Farms. We will put in the show notes so you can go and explore, because his work is pretty profound. What he's doing with mob grazing. He's now farm managing a huge amount of land in the borders of Scotland. And he is amazing with kind of creating compost, etc. His knowledge of the soil is profound. So a perfect soil mate to create our music.
Yes. Exactly. Now, tell us about the last couple of weeks since we recorded an episode. You've been quite busy with film viewings, right? It's still going strong.
Yeah, really exciting. If anyone listening to this podcast hasn't seen, there is a film called 6 Inches of Soil as well. You can watch it globally now via our website. But what's happened is it's festival season, and we've entered it in a few since last year, since January. And even though it's been running for nearly 2 years, it will be 2 years in January, we have had it accepted. And it's so one of the extraordinary things recently, there's a thing called the Food Festival in Belgium and Holland and Netherlands. And at the present, right now in November, it is being shown 51 times in Belgium and 39 in Netherlands. And these are mostly on small farms, family farms, agroecological regen farms. So it's very similar to what we did last year with our screening program and the success we've had globally. And so it's just wonderful to see the surge of another great sort of area where it's being shown. And we're also excitingly for all the hard work that all the team have done. And we were up for an award at a film festival for wildlife, which we thought was pretty profound. We got to share our story. So Colin, the director, and I went over, and that was amazing, very well received. People were really fascinated also about what we've done since with the podcast, etc. And then we're up for a BBC award, Food and Farming Award. So we'll let you know how that goes. But that's for all the work we've done, including the podcast.
It's amazing. And we're all getting people talking about it, which is the main thing. And so really excited about that. So on to today's episode. About 8 or 10 months ago here in Austin, Texas, where I live, I went on a school field trip with my kids. I was a chaperone, and it was a camping trip, except it was a night at the museum. We went to go to the NASA Space Museum in Houston, and we got to stay the night, and they showed us some films. And some of the films that I saw was a lot of footage from the International Space Station looking down on Earth from that view in space. And it really struck me how you could see soil and soil erosion and kind of the impact of agriculture. And I thought it would be a really interesting idea to pull together an episode which explored the idea of perspectives of how everything's connected. And I was lucky enough on that same trip, we drove out to Georgia, which is where one of our guests, Mr. Will Harris, has a farm, and we got to hang out with him. And I thought the idea of this episode is to try to get the perspective of Will, the farmer who looks after his little corner of the earth in Bluffton, Georgia, alongside a NASA astronaut who's been into space on 3 separate trips and spent, I think, 193 days in space, and explore those 2 different perspectives. And then to connect it all together is the amazing Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, who's a climate scientist. And that's the setup for the episode. And I think it's going to be a really good one, looking at that whole concept of different perspectives and how our behaviors might change if we knew a little bit more than what we currently do. If you like Will Harris, he's got an amazing book called Bold Return to Giving a Damn. So definitely go check that out. That'll be in the show notes. If you like Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, she has an amazing TED Talk, which I definitely recommend you listen to. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And she also has a wonderful book called Saving Us. And then finally making up the mix is Colonel Mike Fossum, who's an Aggie, which means he went to Texas A&M, which is the agricultural university here in Texas. Such a nice man. And I'm just really excited to get his perspective. So without further ado, here is today's episode. Well, thank you all for joining us. First of all, listeners, welcome to 6 Inches of Soul, the podcast. Maybe if we have a quick round the world introduction of who we all are, maybe starting with you, Will Harris.
I am Will Harris. I have a farm in Bluffton, Georgia called White Oak Pastures. We raise cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, and poultry. We're vertically integrated. We have USDA inspected slaughter plants on the farm where we slaughter raise. We have a store, a restaurant, and lodging, and we try to be all things to all people as much as we can.
And I was fortunate enough to go visit Will earlier this year and see firsthand what it was like, and that was pretty cool. So how about you, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe? Who are you?
I am a climate scientist and chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy, one of which priorities of the Nature Conservancy in the US and around the world is to make sure that people have the food and the water that we need while maintaining healthy soils and healthy ecosystems. I am coming to you today from Texas, where I live.
In the same state as me, it would have to be a good stone's throw. I'm in Austin, Texas right now. And are you up in, is it Lubbock? Is that where you're at?
I'm actually in Dallas.
Oh, you're in Dallas. Okay, cool. And also in Texas, Colonel Mike Fossum, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Mike Fossum. I'm a retired NASA astronaut. In my career, I flew on 2 space shuttles and helped build the space station. And then I launched on a Russian Soyuz rocket from Kazakhstan and spent half a year up there, was the commander of the International Space Station. And I retired from all of that about 8.5 years ago to come to work for Texas A&M University, running a maritime focused campus, marine and maritime campus located in Galveston. So we've got Texas pretty well bracketed right now.
Yeah, we have. That's true. Well, I'm going to start off. I was actually, I alluded to it earlier, but I was staying at White Oak Pastures earlier this year. And if you stay there, you stay in a little lodge and they give you a little booklet of some of Will's blog posts. And there was one all about how everything's connected. And that kind of gave me the idea for this episode we're recording now. And in it, there was a quote from John Muir. He wrote some diaries which were printed 1911, called My First Summer in the Sierra. And the quote, which Will brought to my attention, is, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe." And I think that's a really interesting quote when you also consider the idea of perspective. And the three of you have all had very different perspectives on the Earth, the planet, the farm. And so I wanted to center today's discussion around that. Obviously, our name, 6 Inches of Soil, we're about agriculture and soil and regenerative agriculture. But one of the people on this call has had a very unique view of the planet. And I wondered if we could start with you, Colonel Fossum, and maybe you could give us a little insight as to what it was like to see the planet for the first time and how that made you feel, and perhaps kind of paint a picture of that experience. That would be really fascinating.
Sure. I've got to back up to being a child. We lived in the country in South Texas when I was small. I had an early love for the natural world and exploring the woods and the ways of rattlesnakes and black widow spiders and feral hogs and javelinas down there, etc. And when I got to school, I was hungry to learn to read because there were science books in the library. And I wanted to know everything about those pictures. And so I consumed science from a young age on. I was 11 when we landed on the moon, and I was on a Boy Scout camp out a few months after that, July 1969, laying on my back on the banks of the Rio Grande River as the campfire died down and a million stars came out overhead. And that's when it hit me. I said, I want to do that too. I want to reach for the stars. It's a very improbable thing. My dad was a Norwegian sharecropper, crippled in an accident, didn't go to college, got a job working for the USDA. But I grew up with that and naturally tended towards science, mathematics. Eventually, a high school teacher pointed me to engineering. And it was a very, very long journey to be even selected as an astronaut. That took 13 years of applying. I was 40 years old when I was finally selected. And what it was like that first mission after so many years of dreaming. I was 48. To feel the rocket engine really come to life under you, and then suddenly the acceleration as you break free of the pad, and the acceleration grows and grows, and it's very intense. And of course, I'd had decades of training and preparation and flight tests in the Air Force and things like that, much simulations, but what it was like to have the beast really roar to life under you. 8.5 minutes later, we were in orbit. The engine's cut off, and my hands checklist floated up off of my chest, but I didn't have time to just play. My job in those moments were to unstrap as quickly as I could, helmet, gloves, belts and hoses and connectors, and grab cameras and get to the window of the shuttle, because ours was a return to flight mission after the fatal accident we had in 2003. And so my job was to document the condition of the external fuel tank, and it was foam coming off of that had damaged the heat shield of the shuttle that killed 7 colleagues. So I got to the window in 1 minute with the camera ready, and I'm looking out the window. Where's the tank? Where's the tank? And the commander says, well, we're still maneuvering. Like, I got there faster than anybody planned. And for a moment, I'm looking at the North Atlantic from space. I see the ocean way down below and puffy white clouds and this impossible black sky and this curved horizon. And I kind of stuck on impulse. I stuck my hand out as I looked at that thin band of atmosphere, that thin blue band between the Earth and the blackness of space. And suddenly it just struck me looking out. It's like, this is not a photo or videos. This is my eyeballs looking through glass at Earth from space. I'm actually here. And it was a spiritual moment for me too. I said a quick, I thought, is this what it's like when God's looking down at Earth? And I'm not sure that's actually biblical, but that's what I thought. And I said a quick prayer of thanks for getting me in my orbit, my crew to orbit safely, and then for making my dream come true after all these years. And then there's the tank. It's time to get to work. But that first look and that realization that I'm really here, this isn't a dream anymore. It's real. Will never leave me.
Wow, I just got goosebumps. Maybe that's just me, but that's incredible. And what were some of the things that you noticed? I know, I think one of your colleagues, Nicole Stott, put it quite well. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that a little bit.
You bet. Nicole was, yeah, she's great about this. The big thing for really was when it strikes you. Now we're very busy. It's intense working up there, but you have a chance to look out at the Earth going by. And what it immediately strikes you is the way we find our way looking at maps. Primarily, it's those colored lines that define borders, and you can't see them from space. They're human constructs. And how you're trying to find landmarks to figure out where you are, to get a picture of your hometown or your university. And without those colored lines, it's hard to see, but it really is all connected. And you see that more and more. And this is, I love where we're going with this, because you see how connected the planet really is. And you see the dust storm kicking up in the Sahara. Some days you could see the dune structure even from space or with some binoculars or a camera lens. And then you notice it's all fuzzy and what's going on, and you don't stop to think about it because you're moving on. You go around the planet every hour and a half. And then a day or two later, you notice that there's a yellow smear coming across the Atlantic Ocean. Those are dust clouds from the Sahara. And then a week later, you realize it's reached Houston, and some of that grit that's on our cars here actually came from the Saharan desert.
Yeah, isn't that something?
It's connected that way. You see the plumes of smoke, the fires in the interior of Australia, the fires and grass fires coming across Africa. And you see the smoke also entering that atmosphere and wrapping around the planet. And so we have one atmosphere, and anything anybody does anywhere affects all of it. You could see like the deforestation of Madagascar and the incredible plumes of colored soil and mud that are flowing into the ocean around it because it's deforested. It's lost its protection, as well as things like in the Amazon, in the rainforest in South America, a road is cut and you could see the cancer growing out of it as people are burning rainforests to create viable farmland. And of course, it's only good for 2 or 3 years, and it's played out because it's not meant to grow crops like that, and it's not sustainable, and so they burn a little further in. Those kind of things.
Wow. I mean, what a view. And I sometimes think what it would be like if we could take every human on the planet to share that experience just for like, I don't know, 6 seconds. How would that change their behavior, what food they bought, how they acted in their lives and stuff?
The overview effect is real. You see it all. If you spend some time really understanding, and the first glance, you don't see it. And being up there for half a year, you could see the changes. You could see the seasons. You could see the fall colors. You could see the first snowstorms coming across North America in the blanket of white. You don't see it while it's snowing because it's all cloudy, but the next day or two it clears out and you see those things. It's really incredible.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. I noticed. So I was lucky enough to do a sleepover at NASA Houston with my kids. It was a school trip, and we saw the movie, which is why you're on this call, because your name was in the credits, and I Googled your name and managed to track down an email address. And anyway,
here we are.
What we were actually doing is we were doing a road trip across to Georgia to go and stay with Will when we did it. And one of the things that I saw in the movie, which I noticed, because from a soil point of view, I could see the Mississippi and all of the soil, the color of that water, and as it comes into the Gulf, and then it all kind of turns right. And so that entire coast of Texas, you're up in Galveston, the water's all brown. But what's really fascinating is when you drive over the Mississippi, suddenly the water's clear again because it hasn't got that soil from all of the farmland of America draining into it. So that was something that I noticed on some of the footage from the ISS was really interesting from that perspective, right?
Absolutely. You see it so clearly, that plume, and we've done part of that by the way and you mentioned it, it's farmland. A lot of that's soil that gets washed out with rains and stuff, but it's also partly because of what we did. The Mississippi River used to creep to the coast through the delta, and it would deposit a lot of its sand right there. When we channelized it, it's a stronger flow going out, and so it doesn't deposit the silted stuff. It ends up offshore, and a lot of it continuing down the way, as well as the sand, which is not right at the shoreline to help nourish our beaches in Texas.
Yeah. And so on that journey, I land at White Oak Pastures in the car with my kids. And one thing which Mike, I learned on my research view, which is quite funny, is that you have lunch every day at the university canteen and you call it your executive dining room. Love that. Because when I got to White Oak Pastures, I was really excited to meet Will. And I said to Jenny, his daughter, who I know quite well, like, when's it going to happen? How are we going to meet him? And she goes, oh, well, he eats every day in the canteen. He has his breakfast here, his lunch, his dinner. And sure enough, I went and had breakfast in the White Oak canteen, Will's executive dining room, and there he was. So I thought it was quite good. But Will, I mean, coming to you, so we've got the big view of what Colonel Fossum was talking about. What about, I've heard you talk a lot about community. I mean, you're not farming the way that you farm because you're trying to save the planet. You're trying to work on your community. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And you inherited a farm that was very industrially farmed with very extractive methods, and you've really turned that around. Now, a lot of people listening to this may be aware of some of your work, but do you want to give us the reasons why you did that and the results you're starting to see? And then we'll come on to you, Kath.
I will. I got to say, I'm jealous of the views that Colonel Fossum's enjoyed. I'd love to see that. My view has been from a height of about 5 feet 10 inches. And it's not nearly as the spectra, but it's very clear. It's very clear to you. So, when I was a very industrial farmer, as my dad was. I went to the University of Georgia. I majored in animal science. That had previously been animal husbandry, but it had become animal science. And science and husbandry are very different. Husbandry is very cyclical. Science is very linear. But and that was the way my dad farmed, and that's the way I farmed. It's all I ever wanted to do. And I came home and started operating the farm in that very linear sort of manner. I was this farm had been a polyculture. My great-grandfather and grandfather ran with a number of different species. They actually slaughtered animals on the farm 6 days a week and sold the meat in Bluffton, this little town I'm sitting in. Dad industrialized the farm and post-World War II and was successful with it. And I never wanted to do anything except run it as an industrial monocultural cattle operation, just like my dad had. And when I came back, I did that, and I enjoyed it for a long time. I enjoyed it until I didn't enjoy it anymore. And 20 years into it, I became increasingly dissatisfied with the monoculture that I was raising, and started expanding that to what we do today. And when I thought of the farm in a very linear manner. I went to my pastures every day with the intention and the knowledge to kill everything there that wasn't a cow or Tufton 85 Bermuda grass. And I literally looked for targets, animals, plants, microbes that needed killing because they were there adversely affecting the monoculture that I had chosen to raise. 20 years in, I realized that while I had become quite good at doing that, every time I picked a target and killed it, I was also killing a number of other things, and I was breaking the cycles of nature. And I came from a culture that believed that we were more powerful than the cycles of nature, and that the maximum bounty from the land would come from breaking them. And when I changed my mind completely. And for the last 25 years, I've been trying to restart the cycles of nature. And I kill almost nothing. I feel like everything in this system has a role there. And we know a lot of them. We know what the benefit that dung beetles create. We know the benefit that honeybees. We know a lot of these. But I believe that every creature in that this naturally occurring in an ecosystem has a role there. And that if I can protect that creature and allow them to fulfill their role in that ecosystem, I maximize the bounty that it produces. And of course, that bounty that produces is the beef and pork and lamb that I sell. And it's proven to be very successful for us. I don't want to go back the other way. And if I had not chosen to do that, I'm convinced my daughters would have not come back. They would not have been attracted to what I used to do.
Yeah, that's so huge. So huge. And you've done numerous studies, but one particular springs to mind where you're proving that now the cattle that you're raising sequesters way more carbon than the way that you used to produce beef cattle.
That was a study done by Qantas, an environmental engineering company. The company that I supplied beef to chose to have this very expensive study done. And it showed that we sequester 3.5 pounds of carbon for every pound of beef that we produce. We were very pleased with that. Richard, more recently, we've done another big study that we paid for and found that we have accumulated about $1,800 worth of NPK, magnesium, phosphorus in our land per acre. And we can actually claim that as a tax deduction. So I feel like it's just a gift. About $2 million in tax deduction.
Wow. Well, it always goes well when what's good for the environment is also good for business, I guess.
Yeah. And while what we do has been very good for the environment, now I don't mean to mislead anyone that profitability has increased that much. Our business is profitable, but the return on investment is not great. It's fine. We want to do it. We choose to do it. But I always need to be careful. There are a lot of aspiring young people out there that want to farm, and I need to be sure I don't make them think this is wildly profitable. I'm delighted that we do it. It wouldn't change a thing. You don't increase. Mostly what we've done is cease to cause environmental problems, and that's important. But there's not necessarily a great economic reward for doing that.
Well, there's a great video which I'll share in the show notes of you standing on a shared waterway, and you look at the water coming from your paddocks, and it's really clear, and then you can see the water coming off your neighbour's fields, and it's like filled with dirt. It's really a really good video. I'll make sure we post that in the notes. But coming on to you, Dr. Hayhoe, climate change. I was introduced to you. You were on Jimmy Kimmel's show one night, and then I purchased your book on the back of that. And your book's called Saving Us, which I would recommend to all of our listeners. It's a truly wonderful book. But I'd wonder if you could give us a little bit of insight as to what climate change is, and especially how do you talk about it? I mean, listeners to this podcast probably are going to be believers in climate change and wanting to make the planet better. But we all definitely have people in our lives that are not that. And so maybe, talk to us a little bit about that and what you have found works.
Fielden is the English whiskey that's changing farming for the better. Field by field, harvest by harvest. Fielden is bringing England's fields back to life with diverse grains that thrive naturally. No sprays, no artificial fertilisers, no shortcuts. It's no chem, regen. Regenerative farming without chemicals. The result? Healthy soils, clean waters, flourishing biodiversity, a smaller carbon footprint, and whiskey full of flavour. Think warm, flaky pastry, butter and caramel. Fields full of life, whiskey full of flavour. Visit fielden.com, Fielden, and remember to drink responsibly.
Sure. Well, if I could back up to connect the dots between what we've already been talking about and what I do, not very many people on this planet have the perspective of a Colonel Mike Fossum. And not even that many people on this planet have the perspective of a Will Harris. So there's a lot of people who want to do the right thing, but they don't know what it looks like. They don't know how to do it. They're stuck in a system where it's difficult for them to even take the first steps. They don't have a next door neighbor who can walk them through it. And they don't have that bone deep conviction, I think, that you have that this is just the right thing to do. So at the Nature Conservancy, we work in every state across the US and 80 additional countries around the world. And a lot of what we do is we try to figure out how to scale these solutions. So we do a lot of surveys of farmers and producers in different areas saying, what's holding you back? Do you not have the knowledge or the resources, or are there policies that are holding you back? Or are there markets that need to be created in order for you to sell the products that you would otherwise grow? Because these enabling conditions, you know, if these enabling conditions existed, so many more people could be doing what White Oak Pastures is doing. But there's just these barriers standing in their way. So that's a lot of what we do. And just to give you one example, I love how you mentioned deforestation. Agriculture is the biggest source of deforestation. And so much of the beef that comes from the Amazon is grown on land where they just cut down the trees to run the cows. It's really hard to keep track of that, though. A lot of it, about 90% of it in the Pará region of Brazil, is all small shareholder farmers. There's a market for beef if you know for sure that it was zero conversion beef. No forest was cut down to get that beef. But how do these small farmers actually guarantee that their beef is zero conversion beef? So one thing the Nature Conservancy has been doing together with a really big supermarket, Carrefour, is creating a tagging program where they tag the cattle in the ears, and you can actually track them from birth through to production to guarantee that you're actually getting beef that did not involve any deforestation, so you can charge a higher price for it, and you're doing good for both people and the planet. So this is what the Nature Conservancy does, as well as working on other issues like maintaining marine fisheries and coastal wetlands and old growth forests and all of these different really unique ecosystems and food systems around the world. So you might say, well, why is a climate scientist the chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy? And if you said that, you would not be the only person saying that. I've heard that from quite a few people. And the reason for that is actually the answer to your question. Climate change is, in the words of the US military, a threat multiplier. In other words, it is taking issues like biodiversity loss, deforestation, difficulty having enough water at the right time, shifting crop production, as well as the droughts and floods that put pressures on food production. It's taking all of these issues and it's making them worse. So if the only thing that were happening were we were digging up coal and gas and oil and burning it, and it's producing these heat trapping gases that are wrapping an extra blanket around the planet in that tiny, tiny, thin atmosphere that you referred to, that we somehow think of as this boundless, endless space. And that blanket was causing the Earth to heat. But if that was the only thing that was happening, it would be kind of a scientific curiosity. But what's happening is, as the world gets warmer, it's making many of our extreme events even more extreme. The heat is getting hotter. The droughts are getting stronger. The wildfires burn in greater area. The hurricanes are dumping more rain on people. And it's making it harder to provide food for people, to sustain our ecosystems, to ensure we have the water we need, and all of the different resources that we depend on for our lives and for our livelihoods. So when it comes to climate change, people often assume it's one of these like environmental issues that only environmentalists care about. And it is an environmental issue, but the reason I'm a climate scientist is not because it's an environmental issue, but because it is actively affecting people who are poor, who go hungry, who don't have a safe place to live, or enough food to eat, or clean water coming out of the tap when they need it. It's affecting all of us, but it's affecting the poorest and most vulnerable people most. So for me, as a Christian, that's actually why I decided to become a climate scientist. I was originally studying astrophysics. And so I was looking even beyond the orbit of our Earth. I was studying galaxies myself. But when
Yeah.
I realized that this issue affects every single one of us humans, I realized I had to do everything I could to help.
I love the way that you talk about it, and I definitely find it really challenging to talk to. So I come from 25 years in the cattle industry, and many of my colleagues work with livestock finishers, and I try to engage with them with passion to say what you're doing definitely has an effect. And sometimes I find that really challenging. I mean, what tips do you have on having those conversations with lifelong believers that, hey, the weather is what the weather is, it doesn't make any difference? Our actions don't make a difference. You know what I mean?
Yes. So I have heard it all, first of all. Any objection that there could be, I've heard it. And they all tend to fall into one of 5 categories. It's not climate isn't changing, it's not real, it's not human caused, it's not that bad. We can't fix it. And it's too late anyways. But what all of those have in common is they're all designed to prevent action. Because for many of us, we are more afraid of the solutions than we are of the impacts. And I think the meat industry is a really good example of that because unsustainable meat production is a huge source of these heat trapping gases that are building up in the atmosphere, wrapping an extra blanket around the planet. Through deforestation, through massive amounts of methane production, it is one of the factors. And we can't get around that. But when you come up, and let me just be clear, we are all part of this because we all use energy, we all eat, we're all part of this consumptive system. When you approach people waving the bony finger of judgment, immediately condemning them, I don't know about you, but when somebody approaches me like that, the last thing I want to do is what they're saying. I'm tempted to just go away and do the opposite, actually. And so whenever we're having these conversations, starting with what we have in common first, and what we have in common is really so much. We all want a livable planet. We want a safe place to live. We want abundant food and water, clean air to breathe. And we want a better future for our kids and our grandchildren. And today, that means we have to tackle climate change. If we don't tackle that, we're not going to have these things we all want. So if we can start there and work backwards, we can apply our ingenuity to figure out how do we get the food that we need, because we have to have food,
Yeah.
in a way that's consistent with the fact that we are sharing a round, finite planet with 8 billion other people.
Yeah. Amazing. Fully agree. Absolutely. So we put out a little thing to get some questions from listeners ahead of time. So this is the interactive part of the episode. So Colonel Fossum, I've got 2 little people living with me who wanted to get involved, and they've got some questions for you. So get ready. So this is Oscar first of all.
Hi, Colonel Fossum. My name is Oscar Tufton, and I'm 7 years old. My question to you is, you need water, soil, and sun to grow food on Earth. What do you need to grow food in space? Thank you.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Well, you need the equivalents of all of them. We don't just plant the seeds in a pan of soil or a garden. It's not quite as easy. There's more things. It's kind of like hydroponic growing. You've got to control the soil and the media that it's in. And the humans do provide the carbon dioxide that the plants want. We manage the level of that to be and just a little bit higher than our normal carbon dioxide here on Earth. And you have to use artificial lights. There are some windows on the space station, but they're actually protected to not allow any ultraviolet in because it's really dangerously strong when you're up above the atmosphere like that. So you have lights that emit the right kind of light that help plants grow. And I did some experiments myself while I was on the space station of growing plants, and the scientists were looking at things like the get down way into the details of how does a root know to grow down when it's in zero gravity. And they're actually looking at the enzymes in the tip of the little tiny plant roots to see how it directs the roots. We on Earth, it's easy. It's like, well, everything knows where down is located, but in space, it's more complicated. And so we are looking at that. It will be hard to produce enough food on a space station to really provide a meaningful amount for the humans. It takes a lot of garden space, farm space to feed one person. But it's going to be important when you go to Mars someday to be growing some plants, some tomatoes, some carrots, and things, partly as a hobby and partly just because of the joy of having some fresh food.
Okay, I love that. I didn't realize that you were growing stuff up there. That's really cool. And you've got a bonus question as well. Are you ready?
Bonus question. If there's no gravity in space, does food weigh anything? And do you gain weight when you eat it?
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, to be clear, there is gravity in space. There's gravity that extends up there. And it's gravity that keeps the moon going around the Earth. It's going at the right speed, at the right distance, which is about 240,000 miles away. And it goes around the Earth in 28 minutes because we're closer to the Earth at just about 250 miles up. We go around in about 90 minutes or an hour and a half. So there's gravity. But the thing is that we're all balanced out. The gravity pull is the same as that spinning force, just as if you had a ball on a string and you're spinning it around, so that the ball is out there going around, and this pull on that string that you can feel is the gravity keeping the ball. But what's going on is it's all balanced. And so we call it microgravity. In the environment that we're in, the humans and the spaceship and your food and everything are going at the same speed. And so you're all floating. And when you're inside the space station, you don't feel any speed whatsoever. Even when you're outside doing a spacewalk, you don't feel any speed. You don't feel like you're moving. You feel like this blue and white and green and brown ball is moving underneath you at about 5 miles a second. So you don't really, the whole time you're there, you don't weigh anything. And most of us lose weight. Part of it is a little bit of fluid loss from the shift of fluids in your body. Right now, the gravity is pulling the fluid out of our head and into our lower bodies. Part of it's a little bit of muscle loss and things like that. But you all return to normal pretty quickly when you get back to Earth, though.
Thank you for that answer. Okay, I've got one more question for you, then we'll move on. This is the next one.
Hi, Colonel Fossum. My name is Tilly Tufton, and I'm 9.5 years old. My question to you is, how nutritious is space food? Thank you.
Kelly, that was a particular concern of mine because I know that I make a real point of eating a lot of fruits and vegetables and healthy food on the ground. And up there, you don't have fresh fruit or fresh vegetables. So it's a lot of it's like camping food, freeze-dried food, and you lose some of the nutritional value. But the food scientists at NASA work really hard at making sure that they get you the food and the balance of foods to keep you healthy up there. Some of it's canned food. Some of it is stabilized food, like literally a pork chop or a piece of steak. Or I'm a Texan, so like things like fajitas in like a foil pack. We don't have a stove, so all we could do is heat them up in kind of a food warmer. And I actually lost weight in space, partly because I was eating healthier. And I did not have nachos and pizza and things like that.
You're so controlled, probably. So you have eaten steak in space, to be clear.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think Will Harris will be pleased with that answer. So Will, I'm going to come on to you now, and I managed to get some little videos from very little people that are connected to you. See if you can recognize who these people are.
Pappy, why does the compost smell so bad?
Do you recognize?
And my granddaughter, Hattie Bell Benoit.
There you go, little Hattie. She says, Pappy, why does the compost smell so bad? What's going on in your compost heap, Will Harris?
When the compost, first of all, we have a slaughter plant. We generate about 9 tons a day of packing plant waste. That's eviscerate, gut fill, bone, non-marketable bones, feathers, etc. And it actually normally doesn't smell that bad. We got a couple of really good employees that manage it. And as long as they are able to put the right amount of carbaceous material in on that nitrogenous material and stir it and get that microbial balance going, it doesn't smell bad. When the loader is down or an employee is out or whatever, it does smell bad. And it's kind of interesting. So that the answer is, it's when we're not doing our job when it smells bad.
Okay.
The interesting part though is you don't have to drive up to it to smell it. I mean, you don't have to get within smelling range to know what's wrong. If you see egrets and seagulls and those kind of birds on the piles, it's okay. If you see buzzards and eagles on the pile, it's not okay. No, there's no hiding, not doing your job.
That's so good. So good. So, Hattie, the answer is it only smells when Pappy's not doing his job. That's the truth, right. That answer. So this next one is from another one of Will's grandkids, and it applies to Katharine and Will. We'll go to Will first, but this is the question.
Abby, why is everybody so scared of cow farts?
So that's Jack, and he asks, why is everybody so scared of cow farts? So, Will, you take us away on that, and I'm going to.
Well, I think cow farts get a bad rep. It's true that when cows flatulate, they're giving off gases that don't necessarily have a real good elemental effect on our atmosphere, our environment. But most of that product is in manure and urine. And if you've got a healthy organic soil that's living, those byproducts go on the land and through the microbes and dung beetles and other flora and fauna, it's absorbed. I told you that my land is, I think I did, my land has gone from 0.5% to 5.5% organic matter. I hadn't put much, if any, organic matter out there. It's from those plants breathing in carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases and building forage on top and roots on the bottom. Once every 60 days, I put the herd through and they bite it off. Some of those roots slough off, not all, but some, and it grows back for another 60 days. And that plant is like a carbon pump, pumping into the land. It's beautiful, and it doesn't cost anything. It has a fantastic benefit. It's just that we are so in love with cultivation and chemical fertilizer and pesticides that we don't let it happen. That's not what happens in a feedlot. It's what happens in a growing paddock, pasture.
Yeah, Dr. Hayhoe, what do you think about cow farts and particularly methane? I think it's really interesting for our listeners to learn about methane. Is it dangerous? Is it not dangerous? Give us a sense of your perspective of that.
So when the cows eat, they take in carbon because carbon is the building block of life. And through incomplete digestion, which happens in us as well as cows, we all know what we're talking about, it's released not as carbon dioxide, but as methane, which is CH4. And why that's a problem is because one molecule of methane traps a lot more heat than one molecule of CO2. It's got the same amount of carbon in it, but it has a totally different heat trapping impact in terms of this blanket we're wrapping around the planet. But I mentioned that it's a byproduct of incomplete digestion. So there are scientists now looking at how to help cows digest their food better, giving them probiotics or things like that, which in addition to treating helping the cows. And so I work at an agricultural university, Texas Tech University, and some of my colleagues are in the field working with cattle finishing lots, actually testing if you give the cattle supplements to improve their digestion, does it even improve the final product? Do they can use more of the food to turn into the milk or the meat that they're producing. So there's ways to address this. And in fact, The idea that you could feed cows something to reduce their methane was discovered by a Canadian farmer. If you can't tell, I'm actually Canadian.
Yeah, you go
Because
Canada.
Yes, who was a bit on the cheap side. And so he was letting his cows in Prince Edward Island eat seaweed that washed up ashore. And then it turned out that a local scientist found out that these seaweed-eating cows were producing less methane. So that was how people realized we might be able to even do something about it.
And I love that that was discovered that way. Is methane something that you can see in any way? Like when Colonel Fossum was in space, or like, is it? I guess that's probably the big challenge with climate change is you can't see what's happening. But can you talk on that a bit?
We can see it now with satellite observations. And so part of the problem, of course, has always been part of the challenge is that these things are invisible. But there's something now called the carbon trace experiment where you can in real time see plumes of carbon and methane being released from around the world. So we can see where they're coming from. A lot of methane is actually leaking from old uncapped oil wells. And you can see where the carbon dioxide is coming from. Just a handful of coal-fired power plants are producing huge amounts of CO2. So when we look at this data, it's really important because it shows us if we're going to make a difference, where's the biggest bang for our buck?
Wow, that's being monitored by satellites, is it, that are going over? And I had no idea that you could do that.
Yeah, check it out. Climate trace, I should say, not carbon trace, climate trace.
Right, climate trace. And I guess when you were in space, Colonel Fossum, were you working on technology like that to help us better understand the fragility of our planet?
We use the space station as a test bed for these kind of technologies or capabilities, and I, because the crew members would have very little interaction with it, I was not familiar with exactly what we did. It was in the late 80s, early 90s, that NASA was doing some research looking at the ozone cycle and the ozone depletion. And when I was in graduate school, I went at it with a little bit of a skeptical bent. How can you how do you really know that these elements coming from chlorofluorocarbons released on the Earth's surface are getting all the way up to the ozone layer where they're actually interacting with the molecules all the way up there? And I really dug in. I spent time with the scientists at NASA centers that were doing this, looking through the Earth's atmosphere at the sun, and that you could read a spectral analysis and I went in, I questioned, I probed and stuff, and came away absolutely convinced that we could see that the bromides and things that should not be in the upper atmosphere. And the only explanation is the chlorofluorocarbons managed to work their way up through the atmosphere where the extreme ultraviolet triggered that. So those things are real. They really are. And we can measure them. And that led to worldwide, policies and restrictions on the kind of chlorofluorocarbons or freons, if you will, that are the most damaging, and the development of others that are safer to use. There's a downside with these things. They're not quite as efficient and they're more expensive, but these are the trade-offs that we make and we must make to protect that blue ball.
And what about you, Katharine, in terms of diets? I mean, I think a report just came out talking about a planetary health diet. What's your view on what we should all be eating or choosing to eat in order to help this whole conversation?
So right now, our food system is not sustainable. It acts as if there's always more soil to go get somewhere else. And there's somewhere to put all the waste that we produce that won't bother us. And the reality, like I said, is we've got 8 billion people living on this finite planet. And when we make these choices, like the Colonel alluded to, we're not making choices for the environment against people. We're making choices for the future of people on this planet. When I wrote a book, I didn't call it Saving the Planet. I called it Saving Us, because we cannot float around in outer space without the resources this planet provides. We have a witness right here. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So it's really about preserving ourselves and our future for our children and our grandchildren. That's why we have to do this. So that said, can we grow enough food to feed the planet? Absolutely. Can we do it in a way that is sustainable long term? It looks like shifting what we eat, because we now eat a diet in which, $1 hamburgers from beef from deforested Amazonian farms is not a sustainable way to eat any type of meat whatsoever. We need to be eating more plants, even just for our health. Like you alluded to, you lost some weight just because of the diet you were on. Just for our health, we need to be eating more fresh fruits, vegetables, less processed foods. And most of us eat far more meat than we actually need to. But there's another issue too. We waste food. We waste so much food that we could feed every person on this planet who goes hungry 1 square meal a day just with the food we waste. So we have to rethink the whole food system from nose to tail, as they say, to make sure that people are getting the food, the nutrition, the protein they need in a sustainable way, and we're not wasting food that's needed to feed people. And if we do that, we can feed the planet in a sustainable way, but we have to be willing to change. And that's why we need pioneers like White Oak Pastures showing people what change looks like.
Yeah. And is that wastage, people buying too much food at the grocery store, something goes, moldy at the back of the refrigerator and you put it in the trash, or is it commercial wastage? I mean, it's really interesting to think about what we can do to help that get better.
It's all of the above. So first of all, we waste a lot of food just on our plate, in our fridges, and our freezers in high-income countries. Then, if something doesn't look perfect, they don't send it to the grocery store. That's a huge amount of waste too. But then in low-income countries, they often don't have the refrigeration they need to get stuff to market before it goes bad. So that's why I'm really excited by innovations like this little sticker they've invented, that if you put this sticker on a piece of fruit or a vegetable, it will keep it ripe and without going bad for weeks rather than days because of the what it has in the sticker. So that's where a lot of people are going hungry because they don't have enough food. But then over here in high income countries, we're growing way more food than we need, and we're throwing 40% of it out in some cases. We don't need to be doing that either, because when food decays, guess what it produces? Methane.
Methane.
Exactly. So there's so many sensible things that we can do. And I know that we can do it because, for example, South Korea, which is a high income country, they recognized food waste as a serious problem a number of years ago, and they have now reduced their food waste by 97%. If they can do it, why can't we?
Oh, I had no idea. That's amazing. And producers will, I mean, what's it going to take to get a whole army of Will Harrises dotted around the earth? That sounds like a semi-scary thing, but what's it going to take for you to kind of influence your neighbors and, break out of the community and have these other communities crop up, do you think?
I wish I had some good news for you, but I have bad news. My friends and neighbors and relatives in and around Bluffton, Georgia, no one has started any sort of conversion to what we do. And when I was first recognizing the benefits of what we do, I would get a little angry with people for being so lethargic. I now better understand. Do you know that a cotton picker costs $1.4 million? And it won't do a damn thing but pick cotton. And all of my friends and neighbors and relatives own one. And they own an interest in the gin, and they own an interest in the cotton warehouse. So these farmers are so financially committed to the industrial monocultural practices that they have done since World War II that I'm not optimistic about seeing a lot of people change over without something forcing them to. And they're good people. I mean, they are, all of my friends and neighbors and relatives are really good people. And they believe that they farm like their dad did, like their granddad did, like the University of Georgia told them to, like everybody in the ag industry tells them to. So I fear that change is going to come very, very, very slowly.
Colonel Fossum, Did you grow up on a farm, or was it just your dad's family? You said they were sharecroppers
Yeah.
when they first came.
It was my dad's family, so that it preceded. He was off the farm by the time it met my mom and I came along. But
Okay.
the family roots are still there, actually near Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where they settled in around 1870. And very, very, very tied to the land. I have family that's still farming, mostly in Nebraska now, and it's a struggle for them. Well, and I understand because they're trying to produce, and I'm not familiar with all of their practices and methods and stuff. But what you're doing is prioritizing care for the land. And if I heard you right, and you didn't say it quite as directly, but you could make more money if you were continuing to be rough on the land and you're prioritizing caring for the land. And I like to think long-term health of your operation is much more assured because of the way you're approaching it rather than squeezing everything you can get out of it this year. Is that a way to summarize it?
That's well said. Yes.
Yeah, because there must be times of the year, Will, where your resilience is greater than your neighbors who aren't farming in the way that you're farming. Is that fair? Like, if the drought hits hard or if you get a lot of rainfall, I mean, your soil would have more pore space than your neighbors and therefore will infiltrate the water at a greater rate. I mean, have you noticed that?
That's a good point. I told you our land's 5.5% organic matter. In general, 1% organic matter will absorb a 1-inch rainfall event. So if
Okay.
you've got 5.5%, you can absorb a 5.5-inch rainfall. Not if it comes in an hour, but if it comes gradually. If you've got 0.5%, the way my neighbors are and the way I used to be, you can only absorb a 0.5 inch of rainfall. You get a 5-inch rain, but you don't absorb much of it. And as a result, dry land, we call it non-irrigated farming, we call it dry land farming. And dry land farming is waning here dramatically. We've been able to grow our farm because many of my neighbors have decided they weren't aggressive in bidding against non-irrigated farms. We were able to pick them up, and we've done that. I can compete with my neighbors on non-irrigated farms. I cannot compete with them on irrigated farms because the commodity system rewards it, and fertilizer is still cheap enough that they can do it.
Yeah. Well, I think on behalf of the planet, we thank you for farming the way that you're doing. You've proved a concept that works. You're producing really healthy food with respect to the environment, and you're working with nature, not against it. And as you said earlier on, you've gone from a farmer who's killing everything except for your grass and your cattle to now welcoming everything. And, I hope with time your neighbors and, beyond start to recognize that and realize that it can have a positive effect on profitability.
Because we've been on this farm for 6 generations, almost 7 generations, we tend to have a longer view of things than many farmers. And Colonel Fossum made a good point that while our profitability is not necessarily greater than my neighbors today, there's a high likelihood that as time progresses, that divergence will increase, and I think it will. So I don't have any regrets over changing the way I farm. While it has not been particularly financially rewarding, it's been rewarding in many, many other ways, and I think the financial reward is pretty imminent.
Yeah, and the limiting factor we all have as a species is that we've got one planet. There's a fixed amount of land, right? And the way that you're farming is that you're making much better use of the natural resource, and I would imagine your biodiversity is greater. You're growing more grass on your acre than some other farmers might be, and so
It's
with
incredible.
time,
It's incredible. I mean, it's amazing how much grass we can grow when we changed so many of the things that we do. I think the planet will be fine. We may not be, but the planet will be fine.
That is correct.
Yeah, and obviously your grandchildren are watching you closely. We've learned that from today's recording. Katharine, I do have a question for you, which comes in from a friend of mine called Martin Bryan, who lives down in New Zealand, and he says,
I was wondering how you were going to get a hold of my son on
yeah,
video.
I know. I haven't figured out how to get to your kids. He says much of your work focuses on hope through action. What have you seen as the most effective narratives that shift people from paralysis to participation on climate issues, particularly when it comes to agriculture and land use?
So often, like I said, people see the risks and they see the worst future that we want to avoid, but they don't know what a better future looks like that we can move towards. And neuroscience actually shows us that our human brain is literally wired to move forwards towards something that is better than what we have. And it is wired to be paralyzed. I mean, if if a bear comes for you, you can run. But long-term risks, we just are not wired to cope with long-term risks that well. So when it comes to the challenges facing our planet, when it comes to the loss of soil, when it comes to the biodiversity crisis, when it comes to climate change, when it comes to pollution of air, water, and soil, which is responsible for millions of premature deaths every year, when it comes to this whole host of issues, which all come from the same root cause, that we are treating this planet as if it's flat and infinite rather than round and finite. We're aware that there's these risks. And around the world, most people are already worried about the future of our lives on this planet. But if we don't know what to do, and we don't know that those things can build a future that is better than the one we have today, not worse, people aren't going to move forward at scale. And so that is what is really important, is not just painting a picture of what we have to lose, but painting a picture of what we have to gain by doing the right thing. And that's why I feel like stories like we've just heard today are so important, because we need that picture of what a better way looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, I should have asked this earlier, but when it comes to food wastage, I mean, what are some of your top tips there? I mean, I know for the Tufton household here, we work hard to make sure our kids eat all of the food on their plate, and anything that's left over, we compost, but we definitely feel a bit guilty about wasting food. I mean, what are some of your tips for some of the listeners to try to help in that food wastage point that you mentioned earlier?
Sure. Well, it really depends on who you are and how you eat. But for me, what I realized when I found out how big an issue food waste was that I was in a bad habit of going grocery shopping once every 2 weeks, loading up with all kinds of food and putting it in my giant freezer. And that food was pretty short on the vegetables, the fruits, and the fish. And it was very long on sort of the processed foods and the frozen foods. And then if I did buy fresh stuff, often it would go bad in the back of the fridge because the fridge was so full before I could even find it. So it was wasting food, and it was also wasting money and wasting time. And so what I did was I changed the way I grocery shopped. I sold my freezer. And since then, I've been more than 10 years with just one little freezer under the fridge, and it's totally fine. I sold my freezer. I changed my grocery shopping habits. So I go grocery shopping 2 or 3 times a week now. I just picked one that was in between my son's school and the university that I would go past every day. I buy a lot more fresh fruits, vegetables, fish, things that would go bad after more than a few days. And the fridge is half empty, so I can always see what's in the fridge. Farmers markets are phenomenal. I actually buy my meat from a local market that grows it locally. Whenever we go out too, just being conscious of, these days when you go out, you get way more food than you need, right? So taking that home, and then there's often services where you can buy packages of food, like there's ugly food, where it's like the
Yeah,
fruit and the
imperfect
vegetables that,
produce.
yeah,
Yeah.
that were a little funny shaped. Or a lot of grocery stores also have packages now of everything that's about to pass its due date, so you can get it for a reduced price. But then also, we all are part of businesses, organizations, schools, churches, or more that often use food too. So looking at our food practices in organizations that we're part of is also part of the solution.
I know when we moved from London to Texas, our freezer went from a tiny little letterbox to this gargantuan thing. And I like that tip a lot. Well, look, I want to be respectful of all of your time, but I thought maybe we could wrap up by just closing thoughts and thinking about the future and what's giving each of you hope. So maybe Colonel Fossum, if you lead us with that, what's giving you hope for the future and climate change and food and soil,
Bet an angle for food. There's a lot with food, and and for thousands of years, the biggest challenge humans have had has been getting enough calories. And the food crops have been, changed through the years and through selective breeding and even genetic manipulation to create calories, mostly starches and stuff. And so there's work now at Texas A&M University to take these foods, and now we can get the calories. Now let's get a higher nutritional content in there. And spinach is one that you very, very easy to do that with. So I'm excited about that. But I think the overall awareness in so many ways, and we've come, through the 60s, 70s, and to today, of that awareness, and we really are. There's no borders in space. Think of it, Earth, the planet, as a spaceship going through that blackness of space. Okay, this is spaceship Earth. We're all crew on this one beautiful blue and white and brown and green marble traveling through space. To paraphrase my good friend astronaut Nicole Stott, those colored lines don't exist. The borders in a big picture do not matter. You cannot see them from space. There's only one border that matters, and that's that thin blue line that separates the globe, our planet, from death, the blackness of space. That thin blue line is the only border that matters. We're all on this side of it, except for an occasional bump up against that. We need to think about it that way and work together for the solutions for everybody. Thank you.
Very well said. And Dr. Hayhoe, what's your hope for saving us for the future?
To care about these issues that confront us, you don't have to be a scientist or an environmentalist. You just have to be somebody who wants a safe place to live and clean air to breathe and enough food to eat and a better future for yourself and for your family. And that means that whoever we are, as long as we call planet Earth home, we're the perfect person to care about these issues and the perfect person to use our voice to advocate for the changes that we all need for that better future.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Will, what are your thoughts for what gives you hope for your grandkids coming through?
When I first started moving away from the industrial commodity beef production I was in, I was figuring it out. And at some point, not day one, but at some point, I heard the term early innovator. And I said, wow, I like that. That's what I am. I am an early innovator. And thank God I didn't tell anybody, but I thought it. And then I saw other people try it and it not work. And then I had some setbacks myself. I said, well, I don't think I'm an early innovator. I think I'm a niche marketer. And I didn't like that as much, but I could live with it. I mean, as long as I can serve my customers, make a living, have something to hand down to my children, I can live as a niche, as a niche marketer. That's all right. But now I'll say that in the last year or so, I have felt more like an early innovator than I felt for a long time. And that mostly comes to the fact that I see more people talking about what good food is and how do you produce good food. And I'm still not sure how it's going to work out. And I still don't know what I am, but it may be early innovator, but it sure looked for a long time like it was just going to be niche market.
Yeah, well, thank you, all of you, for your time today. The perspective of bringing this all together and explaining how we're all connected is really unique and invaluable. So I'm really grateful for your time. So thanks again.
It's good to meet all of you all, and hope you'll come to Bluffton, Georgia and visit us.
Do that. Thank you very much.
I would love to. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, I strongly recommend it. It's a really wonderful place to go visit, just south of Atlanta. So I urge you to go do that. Well, that was, for me, a really good episode. I really enjoyed listening to the three of them talk about everything. What stood out for you, Claire? What were your takeaways?
Well, Richard, as you know, I was skeptical because one of my little rants I sometimes go on is that we spend money on space exploration when our planet that we live on with our feet on the ground is falling apart. But credit to you, phenomenal. I have never met an astronaut, so that was a lovely thing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I really enjoyed the mixture of tones and voices and perspective. I thought it was I think, hopefully given everyone a lovely insight. And I thought it was fantastic to step back. I've just visually was just blown away in my mind, thinking how Colonel Fossum looked down and was seeing fires and all of that pollution going into the atmosphere, and then soil and Madagascar soil running into the sea. You know, these things, I mean, none of us be able to see. Yes, our satellites can take pictures, but him to see it, the naked eye, must have been very
And
emotional.
seeing the dusty sandstorms in the Sahara come up into the wind and then come all the way over the Atlantic and then fall down within the rainfall on Houston, Texas. I mean, to actually see that happening is pretty cool, to think of that perspective and how we are all kind of interconnected. And we also had some, well, wonderful accents. Obviously, I love Mr. Will Harris's accent, but to have his grandkids on was really cool as well. And obviously, I managed to rope my kids in as well, so that was good to get the perspective of the kids. That was pretty special.
Yeah, I mean, for me, hearing Will, I mean, that voice you could listen to all day, couldn't you? You're very lucky to have met him. Maybe I'll get to do that one day. But I love hearing how he has come from, you know, a system of inputs and heavy inputs, and that incredible realization 25 years ago. And he made some very poignant bits about, you know, we're not rich fellas, but the way he talks about it makes it feel like he's rich in life and experience and joy, and the family are working together. His daughters came back to the farm because of the way he changed. Now, this really resonated with me because it's exactly why Anna in the documentary comes back to the farm, because Andrew has changed the way he farms and is farming closely with nature.
Yeah, and that's critical. Like, what is going to happen to the next generation? I agree. I really like that bit too. And I also was really interested to learn Dr. Katharine Hayhoe talk about the food waste in South Korea and how they've managed to reduce it by 97%. And it's really interesting how they've done it. And I think they have provided a model that could work in other cities around the world as we look to try to combat some of the many challenges that exist out there in the agriculture food world. So that was great that we learned a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think so. Asking her, you know, the worry is trying to get, there are skeptics out there, and she deals with that with her work and her balanced, calm approach. But what she said, I hadn't really heard before, which is when quite often people are actually afraid of the actions we might have to take, the solutions that we might have to take. For example, are we eating meat the right way? You know, should we, you know, there's obviously an urge to take that intensive meat production out. But do people want to make those changes? Do governments want to ask companies to make those changes? These are all the sort of complicated bits of it. And so I thought that was quite profound.
Yeah, and I also really enjoyed learning about how from space, from satellites, we can monitor methane coming out of factories and things, which I didn't realize was a thing. But what I did know was a thing was how you can monitor deforestation. And there are some pretty advanced systems in place. So Catherine's day job is working for the Nature Conservancy, and they have ways that you can trace where beef comes from. So if you're importing beef from South America, which I've personally done, that was my previous job, you can actually have it verified that it comes from pasture that wasn't created by deforesting land. And that's thanks to the satellites monitoring it constantly. So I think there's a lot of support that we've been able to use from the NASA technology to help us on this mission to try to make the planet a better planet for, you know, the next generations.
It felt special and a bit different. And I'm quite liking the way we're kind of going in depth, say, for example, to coffee, and then we've sort of pulled away again. So our lens is coming and going. And therefore next time we're hopefully releasing one on World Soil Day, and that will be kind of going back into the soil again. So
yeah, Absolutely. Well, I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Definitely remember to follow the podcast wherever you listen. It definitely helps. If you're able to give a review, that's really helpful as well. It just helps more people discover it. And thank you so much for listening. And until next time, it's bye from me.
In 6 inches of soil, our world comes alive. A podcast of passion where all souls thrive. Soil mates unite in a bold common chase, building our future through Earth's living